So when I pick these topics, I never know what kind of, who's going to show up for these kind of things. Mahonia, some people love them, some people hate them. A lot of people don't know anything about them. They're kind of an interesting group. Mahonias and the rest of the Berberidaceae are kind of an odd group. Usually when I talk about a group like this, I try to really pinpoint, the ID characteristics of that group. And with the Berberidaceae, it is very difficult. You've got Mahonias, you've got barberries, you've got Mayapples, Epimediums are all in the family. There's about 18 genera, and there's not a whole lot that really connects them. The flowers are in parts of 3, so 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 petals, stamens, and anthers, and those kinds of things. A lot of them have yellow roots. That's one way to tell, but other things have yellow roots as well. So, but there really isn't, taxonomically, I've never been able to figure out exactly how they go together. And the taxonomists have been fighting over this group, especially the Mahonia and barberries, for a long time. Basically since Mahonia was first named, there's been disagreement over whether it should be separated from barberries. Gardeners can tell the difference because, Mahonia have pinnate leaves and barberries don't. There was a really good paper done in 2017 looking at doing a real in-depth look at DNA. There had been some DNA work, but it was not it wasn't terribly robust. It didn't use a lot of species. And what they found is that really Barberry Mahonia should be separated. They do separate out. There's a group of Mahonia in the southwestern U.S. It's in the Mahonia section Horridae because they are nasty plants. They are the spiniest, prickliest things. If you've been in the Southwest, I think Algarita, is that how you pronounce it? Is one of those. They usually have trifoliate leaves, often kind of blue, but super spiny, and usually red fruits. They should be separated out as aloe Berberis. And then there is one weird species from Baja California that's known sometimes as Berberis clariae. If I were to look at it, I would look at it and think Mahonia, just because of the veination in the leaves. They say that one should be on its own, I think Moranothamnus, maybe, something like that. It's a weird plant, we can't grow it. But so really taking Mahonia and Berberis and separating it into 4 groups. Mahonia ranges, it's widespread in Asia, from relatively far north down through real deep Southeast Asia. It's on the west coast, comes down into Mexico, Central America. They typically pinnate leaves, yellow flowers, sometimes with a little bit of red in there, blue fruits, occasionally red in a few oddball species, and then barberries kind of range all over the place. Epimediums are in Asia, Podophyllums, the Mayapples are Asia and eastern U.S. So kind of a widespread, large group, probably 700 or 800 species in it. So before we get going, any questions about that? All right, like always, for those of you who are new for these tours, questions are always welcome. Also comments, if I say something and you disagree with me or you want to emphasize something I said, happy to have you pipe up and add that to the conversation. People always have different experiences with plants, and so I often learn a lot from these tours as well. All right, if not, we're going to get going. This is a pretty big group, so I ask you to please try and stay on the paths. I will try to get in a spot where I can talk to everybody really well, but we have things that are dormant underground, and we prefer not to step on them. We do a lot of work to keep our soils nice and fluffy, so please try and stay out of the beds. And Chris didn't mention this, but The camera will be on. You can. He's only really recording when I'm talking. You can walk in front of the camera all you want when I'm not talking. You can walk in front of when I am talking. I don't really care.
That's when you're on YouTube.
But you will be on YouTube if you do that. All right. We'll move on then. All right. I'm going to start with one that's a bit of a mystery. This is one that has been named multiple times. We have it under multiple names in the Arboretum. This one we have under the name Mahonia Beijing Beauty, which is kind of a funny name because there's no way it would grow in Beijing. It is not nearly cold hardy enough. We also received it as Mahonia fortunei Dan Hinckley. Dan swears he didn't put the name on it, that he gave it to somebody else and they put the name on it. It's always kind of struck me, we got it first as Dan Hinckley and then we got it as Beijing Beauty. We've also gotten it as Shanghai Beauty. So I think the nurserymen Shanghai and Beijing Beauties worked together, and I think they just got their wires crossed with what they were going to call this plant. But I first got it as Mahonia fortunei Dan Hinckley, and it does not look like another Mahonia fortunei that I've grown. Mahonia fortunei has these narrow leaflets, but they're usually not quite as stiff and not quite as spiny. And one of the things one of the ID characteristics for Mahonia fortunei is it has powdery mildew. It always gets powdery mildew. I've never grown one that doesn't get powdery mildew. I mean, if you put it out in a really bright spot with lots of wind movement, maybe not, but it always gets it. This never gets it. Makes a small shrub. I've never seen one larger than about 4.5 feet. Small spikes of little yellow flowers in early fall, little blue-black fruit. What got me really interested was I was at the Shanghai Botanic Garden at one point and saw this group of Mahonia that were all slightly different, but really kind of looked like this. And I asked my buddy from there who used to do seed collecting for Shanghai Botanic Garden. He knew right away. He's like, yes, I collected that on Mount Imei. Well, there is no Mahonia that looks like this in any of the records from Mount Imei. So it's kind of an odd thing. Dan Hinckley collected it in China. Fortunei was as close as he could get for an ID on it. So he named it. He brought it to friends in Japan. Friends in Japan grew it. Some North Carolina and South Carolina nurserymen who went to Japan brought it back. They named it both Beijing Beauty and Shanghai Beauty. So what they brought back and named Beijing Beauty is really what was named Dan Hinckley. None of which, I'm pretty sure this is an undescribed species is what this is. So kind of an interesting thing. We'll look at some other Mahonias as we go through. This is one of the finer textured ones that we'll look at. It's got spines, but it doesn't bite too bad if you got to mess with it. But while I've got this here, since this is a good place to talk about it, Mahonia and Nandina, which we'll also look at, have what's called cane growth. They send up these long stems, and for some reason we like to keep plants short. Some Mahonias will get tall. They'll get 12, 15 feet tall. They can get to be what you would really call a tree. And I learned from the first time I learned about Mahonia, you cut those tall stems back to the ground, they'll reflush, you can get them to go up. And it wasn't until really I went to England and I saw all these gardens with these 15-foot tall Mahonias that I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Why do we keep trying to keep them at 5 feet? That's just ridiculous. But if you are going to cut them back, sometimes people will come in and try to cut these canes, halfway back. They want it shorter. When you do that, it will put out one branch and go back up. If you're going to cut it back, if you want to cut out the tallest stalks, you want to keep it shorter, you take those tall stalks and you go all the way back and you cut them back close to the ground, and it'll reflush there. But you typically won't get much in the way of branching. You'll just get another stem that comes up. But try letting your Mahonia media types, the bigger ones, let them grow up, and they go up and they're narrow and then kind of open up on top, and they're just gorgeous when they're all in full flower. Questions about Mahonias in general, this Mahonia? And they do, they're naturally woodland plants. They grow in some shade. You can put them out in more sun, but they tend to get kind of washed out looking, they're just not as great. So some part shade. Once established, most of them are very, very drought tolerant. The group that they pulled out and called aloe Berberis now, most of those are dry desert like plants. They want it full sun and baking soil. We're not going to look at any of those today, but we do have some in the xeric garden down here.
Don't some people consider Mahonia something like a scourge? It seems like they're
yeah. So
if you see them, pull them out, get rid of them.
So Mahonia media, birds do eat the fruit, and they will move them around. In my experience, I have never seen Mahonias. I've seen them in woodland areas, relatively undisturbed woodland areas, but I've never really seen them taken over. But I'm told that in some areas they can do that. If you want to keep them from doing that, cut the fruit off when it forms, and that won't happen. You know, but yeah, they do pop up here and there. There's a little trail by my house that's got a couple that have popped up, Mahonia media types. But these other species, most of the species types I haven't really seen around at all. Okay, this is a Nandina, close relative of Mahonia. These also typically have that cane growth. Some forms, not all of them, also are suckering. This is a suckering form. This is one, the cultivar is Murasaki, which means purple in Japanese. It's being sold as part of the Southern Living Collection as Flirt. They've put out a couple of those, Obsession, Flirt, Pink Blush. Really pretty good plants. I will say, you know, these branded plants, some are better than others. That Southern Living Collection they're pretty good plants for the South for the most part. So, with Nandina, let me pull off a leaf from the back side here. That is one leaf on a Nandina. They are, I don't know, tripinnate, quadrupinnate, very pinnate leaves. So I'll sometimes see people, we'll have propagation workshops, and people will cut off, you know, this and try to root it. That won't work because that's just part of a leaf. It's not a branch. Nandina are grown for this kind of fine textured foliage. They're often called heavenly bamboo. Then spikes of white flowers followed by red fruits. This is another one that the birds can move around some. In the winter, they often get really brilliant red color on them. They're evergreen, but they'll get really brilliant color. This one, Murasaki, purple. You can see new growth. You can see a little bit over there, and in here comes out purpley red, and then it'll go green. This is a fairly low growing one. Grows about 3 feet tall, and it suckers. Obsession is a larger one, doesn't sucker as much. There are a bunch of dwarf ones. When the dwarf ones came out, landscapers loved them. You get these little dwarf ones, they've got little puckered leaves. And the landscapers in the nursery will tell you, oh yeah, it gets good winter color, good red berries. If it's got those little puckered leaves, it does not fruit. They will not fruit. You got to have these kind of crisp foliage for it to fruit. I don't know why people love those little puckered leaf things. I think they are just the ugliest plants ever. I cannot stand them. Oh man, that is a personal interjection there.
Isn't that a compound? A palmate or something? When you held up the whole leaf.
I think that was kind of a weird. The question was, is that a palmate leaf, compound leaf? I think if.
It is.
But it starts from down here and then it comes up and branches out to the side. I think that's would be considered a tripinnate. 1, 2, 3. Not palmate. I think they'd have to be come out from here because this. Yeah, but they do have that look. Yeah. And this is a lower one. Some of them, this central one will be longer, and these side will be shorter, and it looks a little bit more like the tripinnate. Nandina are another one that you can grow in sun or shade. I think they look a little bit better with some shade. They're very tough. The taller ones, same thing. Those you may want to cut back because they can get really bare on the bottoms. But again, you want to cut back to the base. Somebody told me, a longtime gardener told me that if you go in on those old stems, the petiole where the leaf attaches to the stem, when the leaf falls off, when it senesces, it leaves the base of that petiole on the stem. And if you go through and peel off those petioles, it'll branch from down there. I've never had the patience to go in and do that, but somebody here do it and report back to me how it works. We'll see. Nandinas are another one that's gotten bad rap. They do spread around in some areas, and there was a big outcry in Georgia. I can't remember the town, but they had a bunch of birds die, and when they did an autopsy on the birds, they found Nandina berries in their stomachs, and they said, don't plant Nandina, it kills birds. Well, if you do a little bit deeper digging, what you find, if you read the reports and some of the interviews with other people, like the city horticulturist, they say that they estimate that 50 to 75% of the shrubs in the landscapes were Nandina. And so what happened were these songbirds coming through, they had nothing to eat except for Nandina berries. And so they ate them, and that was a problem. When I sold plants retail, one of the things I always told people was the red berries on Nandina last for a long time because birds don't particularly like them. But if it's the only food around, that's what you get. So plant the diversity, don't plant one thing, and you'll be better off. Questions? Yep.
Have there ever been intergeneric crosses between Nandina and Mahonia?
No, not that I know of. There are intergeneric crosses between Mahonia and Berberis that they call Berberis, but I've never heard of one between Nandina and Mahonia. And when you look at flower structure looks very different. It actually, in a lot of ways, a cross between, if you look at on gross or on floral morphology, it would make more sense to see a Mahonia or Barberry Epimedium cross than a Nandina cross. But it's a good question. All right, any other questions? I'm not going to stop and talk about it, but as we walk by, you'll see some kind of taller ones over here to the right. Those are with flowers on top. That's a selection called White Pearl that instead of red fruits has kind of creamy white fruits on it. Yep.
So, we had one Nandina over there that has curly. These are good. There's something different about these.
Yeah, the leaves are contorted and curled.
Mm-hmm. Salmon colored berries, adore that. If I took the propagation class again, can you pull off a leaf and do that? Or not?
No, you had to do a stem.
Stem?
Yeah.
Stem, so where would you cut it off? Just not saying I'm going to.
Well, I mean, you really.
I've got Nandinas at home, the Alba, that I love, and I just wonder.
They root pretty easily, but you have to, take off about this much of the top of a stem, because they're canes, you can't really do much else than whack off the top, and you just pull off the lower leaves, and the leaf, you can't root it from a leaf. You need to root it from a stem. Another relative in the Berberidaceae are the Mayapples, which seems very odd, doesn't it?
Yes.
So this is, depending on your taxonomist, Podophyllum plianthum or Dysosma pliantha. It really depends on which one you like. We have our own native Mayapples, Podophyllum virginianum. Now I'm drawing a blank. Is that right? Anybody?
Sounds right.
Anybody? Yeah. Okay. Virginianum then. Our own native ones form these big patches in the woodlands around here. They're really great. They're easy to grow. but they go dormant. They're going dormant right now. You know, they do not last very long. They have big showy flowers. Biggest flowers in the genus are in the Podophyllums and Diasosmas, but the flower is down underneath the leaves for most of them. There are a couple that will come up and flower kind of above it as the leaves are unfolding, and then the leaves go over it. So you have to kind of look down. Our native Mayapple has a single or sometimes two kind of white or pale pink flowers, about an inch and a half or so. The Diasosmas, these Asian Mayapples, have a whole cluster of burgundy flowers under there. They're really beautiful. At home I've got a boulder retaining wall, and I plant them on top of that so I can actually see the flowers, because otherwise you got to crawl on your belly. They make a big fruit. That's how they get the name Mayapple. I'm told that turtles eat our native Mayapple fruit and move them around that way. I don't know. I'm told this, I don't know this for sure. I'm passing on bad information perhaps, so keep this in mind, that all parts of the plant are poisonous, except for you can eat the Mayapple when it is fully ripe. I've never tried it. The people who've told me that, I guess I didn't trust enough to take them up on it. That's right. These plants, these Asian Mayapples can be very slow to bulk up and grow. You pay a lot for one, and then you have it. What I found, I thought we had a suckering form. What it really is if you cut the roots on it, then once they're established, they'll send up new plants from there. So I imagine you could do root cuttings as well, but if you have a plant, grow it out for a year or so in the garden, then go out with a shovel and just around it and cut some roots, and you'll get more popping up by next year. This is a collection from Taiwan that we made. It tries to stay evergreen. If it warms up during the winter at all, it pops up and then gets killed back, but hadn't seemed to bother it. Other ones don't do this. I've grown this species from Chinese sources where the leaves easily get waist high and are, this big around. It won't flower when it's a single leaf on a stem. It's got to get to where there's two leaves on the stem before it'll flower. They definitely want shade. They're a woodland plant. Any questions? Yeah.
I have to ask, you'd be disappointed if I didn't. Since most of the members in this family are pretty not generally liked by deer, what about Mayapples?
Well, they certainly don't eat our native Mayapples. This is a thicker, leathery leaf, more leathery leaf, perhaps poisonous, perhaps not. So I don't think so. I've never had them eaten, but who knows. This is a new plant from that Southern Living collection, bred by a friend of the Arboretum. This is, they're breeding for kind of kinder, gentler Mahonias. This still has a pretty vicious point at the tip of the leaves, but no spines along the sides. If you get a little more light than it gets here, it gets a real nice blue color. Pretty good spikes of yellow flowers, and the flowers on Mahonias are on their terminals, so it'll be up the top, and they'll be about 6 or 8 inches long in late summer, early fall. It'll then form fruits. This is last year's, the remnants of last year's fruit stalk. I think I was told it's sterile. Nice red juice in those berries. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I was told that it was sterile. Maybe that was just from the breeder not telling people that so they wouldn't try and breed with it. I don't know. But I really like this plant. I think it's a real departure from other Mahonias. There's not really anything else that looks like it. So I think it's very cool. What's that? It's a good question. Maybe 6 feet tall, maybe taller. I'm not 100% sure of the parentage, all the parentage in it. The oldest one I've seen was about 6 feet tall. But, I pulled off that that fruit stalk down here, it's put on what 8 or 10 inches of growth, so it's not slow.
Does it get wider than that?
Well, so it's got the cane growth, so it'll send up more stalks, so it'll get wider that way, but it'll go up. And what most mahonias will do is the stems go up and you send more stalks out, and so it kind of goes up in a kind of a V if you just let it go.
Can you say the name again for the camera?
Mahonia Marvel.
Thank you.
You say that has a little more leafing shape to
No, it got beat up. I think a tree limb fell on it, and so these leaves are just about knocked off. They're barely hanging on there. It's mostly off. You see that yellow wood that I was talking about? So yeah, no. Usually it's out. They stick out pretty stiffly. This is Mahonia gracillipes, and it's kind of an unusual mahonia in that most mahonias are fairly easy to root. Mahonia gracillipes can be a little bit trickier, and it doesn't seem to fruit well by itself. It kind of prefers to have another mahonia with it. This is a mahonia that grows on in kind of central China, south central China, Sichuan. Mount Imei is where you see it fairly often. It's very distinct. It's got a very distinct leaf shape, but it also has these silvery white backs to the leaves. And that's one of the first things, whenever I see a hybrid one, I think it has gracillipes in there, I always flip it over to look at the leaf. Sometimes the leaf is, some hybrids with this don't have that, but most do. Breeders really like this plant. They like that characteristic, although you have to get up close and personal to really see it. But the other thing they like on this is pretty much Mahonia have yellow flowers. Gracillipes has kind of a orangey red outer petals, and then inside more yellow. But it's got the most variation in color that you see out there. So often you'll see this bred with other things to get that color. There are a couple other ones that have more almost orangey gold, but this is really where you can get some different color in there. Otherwise, kind of a grow it like the other Mahonias. Questions? Great. No, it'll flower just fine. It just doesn't set fruit heavily by itself. So if you had another gracillipes, you'd get better fruiting. Fruit, yeah. Some would. It's a fairly promiscuous plant. We'll look at one maybe in here that's a natural hybrid, and it seems to be pretty easy in breeding programs to get crosses with this. So other Mahonias probably will get fruit from it. The Mahonias that I've shown you have all been Asian Mahonias, and that's mostly what we grow. But there are an awful lot of Mexican Mahonias. We've tried growing Mahonias from Guatemala as well. They in Costa Rica, they do range down there. So this is a Mexican one. This is Mahonia pallida. And one of the interesting things about a lot of the Mexican and Central American Mahonias, they tend to be very tall. They tend to be a little bit flopsy like this, but they also tend to not have spines. They're much kinder, gentler, although they're probably harder to use in most landscapes. Kind of put them in the back of a border and they tower up above there. Most of the Asian Mahonias have dense spikes of flowers, so they'll be 6, 8, 12 inches long or longer on some of the hybrids, but they're densely packed flowers. A lot of the Mexican ones have these very loose, airy panicles, and when you see those and then look at some epimediums, they look very, very similar. So some of the Mexican ones, you can get flower stalks that are a couple of feet, but it's little small flowers at the end of long peduncles all up there, so very cool. They tend to like relatively well-drained soil, tend to be a little bit more happy with more sun than the Asian Mahonias. But some of them are very neat plants. You know, you have something like this. This kind of shows you that cane growth. You know, if you were to cut this back, you'll just get one thing growing along here. But if you want to propagate them, when you get them, when they start growing horizontal like this, they will send up shoots along here. Normally, if this were growing upright, it would just keep going up, would never branch. But when it's down sideways, it starts sending shoots up because plants want to go vertical. So you could take all of these, you could cut them off. There's 3 or 4 right here, and those would all root great, be real easy, easy to propagate that way. So if you had something like this and you wanted more of that, you can kind of force that by pulling it out horizontal and even scratching the bark right above a leaf node, and that'll encourage it to grow. Questions? All right. We've got a lot of mahonias tucked around in here. I'm not going to really stop and talk about it, but on your way out, if you want to look, between this hydrangea, like over this variegated Daphne in the back, there's a little mahonia about this big. It is a extremely rare mahonia. We think it's probably the first one that came in the U.S. I've never heard of it being grown in here anywhere else. It's Mahonia shenii. We were very excited. We collected a bunch of seed off of it. It is very promiscuous. I think we have one seedling that came out looking like the parent. Everything else was wildly different. At my house, I have 3 different ones planted. They all, 2 of them you would know came from that plant. The other ones are, you know, could be anything. So you got to be careful sometimes when you're growing things from seed and from cultivated sources. Almost left without looking at this. Now this is a spot where I've fallen down, I think, because I love epimediums. They're one of my favorite shade perennials. They're really fantastic plants, and I pulled some numbers before we came out. I was going to mention before, we only have 23 different epimediums, and there are plenty more than that. We do have 62 different mahonias and 42 different barberries, and 8 different podophyllums, we think, although some of them that came in as under one name, I think, are probably wrongly labeled. But so this is Epimedium. This is Epimedium wushanense, a really striking Epimedium. We've got these very long leaflets. This is another one these are pinnate leaves. This is they're tripinnate. You get these multiple leaflets, but almost always Epimediums will have their leaflets in 3s on the plants, and it's real typical of Epimediums, in that you'll get often you'll have a central leaflet that's, you know, pretty symmetrical, and then you'll have these 2 leaflets on the side that are you know, that are not. This is about as big a leaf as you usually get on an Epimedium, though. Often they're smaller, sometimes the leaflets are very small. And then they have spikes of flowers. This one is finished flowering. But you see, you get these spikes. And Epimedium flowers range from white to yellow to orange to pink to purple, sometimes bicolors. They have these spurs on the flowers, really beautiful flowers. In some species, they're very airy, and you have these very open panicles. In others, they're a little bit tighter and showier. It just depends on the species. There's a lot of variation out there, but they're all really easy garden plants for shade. Once established, they'll tolerate pretty dry shade, so good for, you know, planting under your trees and things like that. They're often sold as either deciduous or evergreen. And what I always tell people is the evergreen ones, they're not so much evergreen as they don't have the sense to go completely dormant. They look terrible by the end of the winter, and they flower early, so those flowers will start coming up while the leaves are still out there. So sometime midwinter, cut your just go out with a weed eater or a lawnmower and run over your patch of Epimediums, cut it all down, allow the flowers to come up so you can really appreciate them, and then let it go dormant. I mean, then let it leaf out. But if you wait until the new growth comes up and it flowers, there's nothing you can do. They've got all these little fine stems, and you get in there, you'll immediately start cutting off the new growth and the flowers when you do it. Plant I'm looking at right now is this Mahonia right here. This is a wild collected form that we collected in Taiwan, Mahonia oiwakensis. You can see the new growth on it comes out really nice red. Got these very thin leaflets on there. We've collected several Mahonia oiwakensis. We really like this one, and we're probably going to put a name on it because it's we really think it's exceptional. It gets medium-sized flower spikes in the spring, but you can see it is vicious though. So I don't know if people want it. People all want nice ones, but you might be able to see there's some red foliage back there, the new growth. It is vicious. It will get pretty tall, especially when you put it in shade. It'll get taller quicker. There's some the same age as it in Asian Valley that we walk by that are pretty good and tall. I kind of really wanted to point this out because most of what you will see in terms of Mahonia, the most common ones traditionally have been Mahonia Epimedium, which are a hybrid Mahonia between what used to be known as Mahonia limarifolia, now Mahonia oiwakensis, subspecies limarifolia. And you see that over here, all these plants are Mahonia Epimedium types. And they get pretty big and bushy and can get pretty tall. And really beautiful. They tend to be really nice plants when they're small and really nice plants when they're big, and sometimes that in-between stage can be a little bit awkward for them. But some of the Mahonia media types can have, the flowering can be just absolutely outstanding. We have some in here. We cut out a tree, so they're kind of beat up a little bit, but Hope and Charity have really, really long panicles of gold flowers, and they flower during early winter, and there isn't much out there that's flowering then. And if you come out here on a 60-degree day when those are flowering, they will be covered with bees and pollinators because there isn't a whole lot else for them at that time. So it's great if you're doing pollinator gardens, which is why I always tell people with things like Mahonia, they say, oh, aren't they bad? And we say, well, they do feed the birds, and we're cutting down all the forests, so there isn't as much food for the birds, and they are good for pollinators, so they have benefits beyond just whether or not they're native. They do have ecological benefits. So you always have to weigh with your plants ecological benefits versus ecological negatives, and figure out where the plants stand. I have a love-hate relationship with barberries. This was the punishment when I worked at a retail nursery. If you came in late, you had to go tag all the barberries and junipers, and you spend the rest of the day itching and prickly because they have little spines, at all the nodes. So mostly what we know, most people know barberries as, are the little purple plants, little bagatelle and some of these other Berberis thunbergii types. But it's a big group of plants, barberry. And some are evergreen, some are deciduous. This is an evergreen form, Berberis limpergiana. This is a deciduous one, Berberis henriana. And really, mostly, like I said, we grow the thunbergii types for their foliage color. They've been bred to have gold or burgundy foliage color for most of them. Some orange ones now. The orange ones look like sickly purple ones to me a lot of times. But hey, who am I to judge? But some of the other ones have really beautiful flowers. Berberis henriana, for instance, has 4 to 6 inch little panicles of yellow flowers that hang down, and so it kind of makes an arching shrub, and you get all these gold flowers hanging down. It's really quite showy. And then red fruits. You can see this little guy over here, this unnamed hybrid it's getting ready to come into flower. And you know, the flowers, individual flowers, not much. It's pretty typical of barberries. They tend to be pretty bright gold, primrose yellow to gold. Pollinators do love them. Some of the deciduous ones and some of the evergreen ones get very nice kind of fall and winter color. You can get reds and purples and golds in the coloration on there. They can be really nice. So a lot of times what you see though is this Thunbergii type. You know, you see both yellow and purple in here. I think I had to tag too many of them. I was probably late to work too often as a college student, and so I just can't muster much enthusiasm for the Thunbergii types. And that is, when people talk about barberries escaping and being a real pest, it's the Thunbergiis that are the ones that have gotten out. Although I have found that even some very good native plant folks can't tell the difference between Berberis thunbergii and Berberis canadensis, our native barberry. Because I've been shown ones that were terrible invasive, and I'm like, but that's our native one there. Red fruits on most of the barberries. All of them, I think, all of them that I know of do have spines on there. So as I'm standing here, this thing's grabbing me in the back right now, reminding me of my college days. Questions about barberries? Questions about Berberidaceae, Mahonia, Podophyllum, Epimedium? Anything else?
Oh, I got one.
Yeah.
How about bloodroot? Is it in the same family as the mayapple?
No.
It's totally different.
Totally different.
But they grow in the same area. They almost look very similar.
Yeah. They're totally different. They grow in the same area. Some of the other genera in Berberidaceae, Vancouveria, which is very similar to Epimedium. I'm going to draw a blank now. There's only about 17 or 18 species, so, and we don't grow most of them. But there are some things that look very similar. Some of the smaller thalictrums look like Epimediums. Yeah. Other questions? All right. Well, thank y'all. It's a beautiful day, so I stopped with y'all out here on purpose so you could enjoy the walk back to your car or spend some more time out here.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Once Chris gets back to the office, be on the lookout for an email about the auction for the Southern Plant Symposium. There may be some Mahonia in there. I can't remember. Maybe not.
But no Barberry.